Okay, a coach is a passionate and dedicated person who unlocks hidden potential by developing and believing in you all. I'm a consultant, I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, but more than anything, I'm a coach.
Rise above where the limits end. Speak up.
I'm here to champion your success. I'm here to make a difference in your life.
The metric is set.
So welcome to episode 2. I'm Ray Diffley, your host and an expert in residence, so to speak. And now we'll begin to dig a little further into AQ, Articulation Quotient. This, once again, to me is a term that I hope becomes global. I hope it becomes a part of admission assessment, of job placement assessment. I hope it becomes part of every parent's raising of a child. I hope it elevates society to have better conversations and not waste time with small talk and insignificant exchanges, as much as those can be friendly and polite. And this podcast exists because I want to share and teach and reach people that can't be reached with my one-on-one work in my RD3 education, advising center, student development work as well. So welcome to episode 2. Let's dig in. Sitting on the other side of the desk or in a chair across from someone you're interviewing, knowing that you have to select or sort out 1 or 2 students out of 10 is a challenge. I'm not gonna lie, as the phrase goes for kids these days. My job is to figure out ways to not take someone. That's a pretty dramatic statement. It's difficult for admission people because they tend to be wonderfully friendly, people-loving, education-loving individuals. And the highly selective schools have a very difficult job, and that is selection, weeding out people. Instead of the director of admission, a lot of folks think of themselves as director of rejection. One of the planes on which we filter or eliminate students is during the interview or any interaction, because sometimes we're talking about college here, and those can come in the form of essays. You have to be able to predict success. And what I have learned, certainly in the 23 years doing the admission work and the 10 years on the other side of the desk now, is that you can actually tell a lot about a person. Not everything, but you can tell a lot about a person by that first impression, by how they express themselves, because it's a great reflection on the work they've done to become who they are and their ability to express who they are. So AQ is not just public speaking. I sometimes talk about it as public speaking 2.0 or 10.0, but public speaking is really getting up in front of an audience, maybe at a podium or on a stage, and delivering an address that you've rehearsed and practiced. AQ is how you interact with people every day. And it's not just limited to what you say. It's how you hold yourself. It's how you express yourself with your body language. It's the words you choose. But it all goes back to the beginning. And this is something that when I proposed the book Speak Up to the publishing company, they loved this concept of batches of 10. That, I live my life as an old admission director and now as a educational consultant in one part of my life, understanding that schools, employers, teams, social groups, frankly, are always selecting. And people use this rubric to include people or exclude people. One of my favorite phrases to use with my students, I used it this morning on a Zoom call I had, was that, because this is when I'm onboarding new students, right? May is a time when I work in sort of a 12-month cycle, sometimes a 1, 2, or 3 year cycle with students in the development work, but certainly for admission, it's about a 12-month cycle. And I say to them, I'm going to do everything I can to increase your chances for a yes, and I'm going to do everything I can to minimize your chances for a no. And so much of that, in my opinion, comes down to AQ, how you express yourself, how you know yourself, whether you've done the work. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see my air quotes. Whether you've done the work to reflect on who you are, understand the value you bring to the table, and you're able to express it. And I understand many students, especially teenagers, young people, they may have all that greatness within them, but when it comes time to pulling it out or putting it on display, they stumble, they hesitate, they fall. It really is remarkable to me because I can spend some time with a student and understand their value and what they have to offer, and their thoughtfulness and their intellect or their humor, whatever their traits might be. But you put that person in an interview and quite quickly, none of it shows up. And sometimes it's stage fright, but more often than not, it's just not having put the work in. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're putting the work in, you're putting the time in, you're going to spend some time reflecting on this, getting some of the very practical skills that I lay out in the book. It's a 5-step plan, but as I said to the publisher, it could be 105 steps. I'm just making it simple, easy, manageable, and that's what people need to consume to be able to implement advice into day-to-day action. So again, the big goal here is for any listener to increase their AQ, to have them understand the term, actually to help me spread the word about this concept of AQ, and to equip their child or themselves. Believe me, I've been to plenty of social events, and the adults consuming each other's time is not exactly an incentive to go to the event, right? People are busy. They have stuff to do. They do not want to go chit chat about the weather or something else, as much as that can be a perfectly fine introduction. You get my point, right? It's not a good use of your time. It's sometimes exhausting talking about nothing for a half hour with someone and then going home and realizing you're behind on your homework or on your laundry or whatever it might be. So AQ really, I just listened to, who was it? Steve Jobs this morning. I listen to so much content, and I pluck off pieces that I feel are relevant and valuable for making the case for AQ. And one thing he was saying, or maybe it was Jeff Bezos, maybe it was both of them, but they're saying you've got to have a greater vision for your vision. So AQ is not just about getting into prep school or college or getting a job. It's really about lifting society to a new level where, whether it's online dialogue, but mostly for in-person dialogue, developing relationships, there's just a higher level that's reached because someone understands the concept of AQ. They know their value. They uplift others through the use of their strengths, and they excel. So that's what AQ is. That's my goal. I'm going to dig into some real specifics, but I'll tell you one quick story before I do that. And I've got, as I think in my book, I say I've somehow come in contact with, evaluated, reviewed some 50,000 students in 33 years. So there's certainly some perspective there. And the stories that stand out are actually across the whole spectrum. One of them comes to mind, and it comes to mind because, once again, if this podcast ends up on YouTube, you'll see a visual that one of the parents of my students, when I was done working with her, sent me a Air Max Pro, whatever these headphones are, and he inscribed it with Ray Diffley AQ, because his daughter had previously applied to 9 boarding schools before she engaged with me to do our work together. And upon first impression, just a fantastic young woman, friendly, fairly confident, somewhat mature, had interests, talents, abilities. That girl was waitlisted at 9 schools. She was 0 for 9. Nobody rejected her because obviously she had a lot going for her, but no one invested in her. She could not get over the hurdle. In fact, her dad relayed a poignant piece of her story was that each admission officer that interviewed her said, "Oh, she's so wonderful and lovely. We had a great conversation. I'm sure she's going to have a lot of options." Let it be noted that's a dangerous phrase because it's insinuating that she's great, but we're not sure we're going to take her. So we hope someone else does so that we don't feel bad. And sure enough, she was waitlisted at 9 places. Everyone had the same exact sentiment. She's great, but she's not for us. As soon as I dug in to work with that young woman, I could tell that her message was scattered. Her message was broad. You could have a conversation with her. Actually, 9 schools could have a conversation with her and see a lot, but see nothing. And so she never really funneled her her value proposition. Such a horrible term for a child, right? What's your value proposition? But schools and businesses and places are going to want to see what you add. And her message was way too broad and needed to be more specific. So to do that, of course, you have to dig into the person, see what their strengths are, who they are, what exactly will they add to the table. A long story, a little bit shorter, her number one thing was creativity. And so we honed in and focused on creativity. She got to be expert at that concept, that term. She had plenty of evidence to show it, but there was zero doubt that when she left those interviews this next year, that she was going to be the top kid in the category to influence others and the community with her creativity. So lo and behold, the second round, of course, she has 4, maybe 5 options from the top schools, same schools of the 9 she applied the year prior. And, you know, the joy of being in this work now for going on 9-10 years is that I get to see the outcomes, right? So I got the headphones sent from the dad after she got admitted to her top choice, boarding school. And then last year she was admitted to Harvard, Ivy League school, obviously, and is there now, just finished her first year and is thriving. And they saw another version of the one that started in her high school. So just there's hundreds of stories. And I guess the one thing that I would say that I'm proud of, maybe a few things, but one thing certainly that I see and other people in the business world or in the adult world who have, experience in life see, is the key to getting help as a young person is to have mentors, have coaches, have teachers, have advisors, whatever you call them, with a perspective, and a perspective relevant to what they're trying to accomplish or do. And so I was blessed with a perspective of 23 years, traveling the world multiple times over and over, going through the selection process 23 years in a row, 50,000 kids. And then watching those kids actually adjust, adapt, excel at my school, and then go on to college, go on to life. And now I think 90% of my Facebook or Instagram friends are all from my admission experience, getting to know them as applicants, as students, and as people in the world. So to me, the key is AQ. Plain and simple. If I had to teach one thing, if I had to give one piece of advice, it's to develop your AQ, and that's why this podcast exists. So let's talk about the 5 pieces to AQ that makes up the book. And I would say, as someone who's been in academia, it was an unbelievable joy to work with Brian Tracy publishing team and work with Brian Tracy himself, who was an idol of mine growing up and in my adult career. So when Brian saw AQ and the 5-step process, he kind of said, this is it, partnered up. And, the result is a very simple, easy to read, quick, short book called Speak Up. So the 5 keys, I'll go through them pretty quickly. Number 1 is personalization. And personalization is as simple as using my name. Hello, Mr. Diffley. Hello, Ray. Instead of just saying, hey, buddy, hey, pal, hey, you. And, we all know when there's a faker out there who's supposed to know your name, they don't know your name, and they use some word, buddy, pal, hey, you. There's a hilarious SNL skit on this, actually. And the classic scenario is the coworker and the spouse. Your close coworker, you've known their spouse for 20 years, but you still don't know their name. Anyhow, I digress, but check out the SNL skit on knowing the name of some kind of Jeopardy show. Personalization is also, and again, if this ends up on YouTube, this podcast in some form, it's going to be the person who can quickly meet someone, take in the information in their environment, and connect about it. So if I'm walking into a furniture store, a car dealership, or a realtor's office, and I have a Red Sox hat on or a Yankees hat on, clearly the opportunity is there for someone to say, are you a Red Sox fan? And depending on the answer to that question, which would probably be a yes, that person greeting them can make some kind of warm comment or wisecrack. I mean, this is the moment. Personalization is number 1. it's a perfect segue into number 2. So number 2 in the 5 steps is what I call answer plus. So you're giving the answer to a question, and then you're giving more information. It's a plus. Okay, so if someone says, how are you today, Mr. Diffley? I say, I'm good. That is a dead end answer. It's a conversation killer. And if I'm doing it on purpose, I know my goal is to kind of get rid of this person, or just be polite and kind. I'm not sure it's kind. Be polite and say, I'm good. If you want to be a little better than good, you can say, I'm good. How are you? And you're turning it back to them. But clearly, you're not giving any information. It's your goal to not give information. It's a conversation killer. It's a dead end. So if I'm interviewing a student and they don't know that when I say, how are you? Or how was the tour? If they end in one word or a dead end, my impression, we're off to the wrong start. We're off to a bad start. We're off to a poor start, a weak start. If someone says to me, how are you, Mr. Diffley? And I say, and I'll be a little bit of a wise guy here, but I usually say, well, I'm pretty good. I walked my dogs down to the beach this morning, came back, had some avocado toast, did a little yoga, read the dictionary, and then got excited to head to my office for a great day. I don't do those things. This is obviously for educational purposes only. But if our conversation were to get cut off by a faulty internet connection or something pulling me away, at least people would know. I have 2 dogs. I live near the beach. I maybe make an attempt at eating healthy with my avocado toast. I try to be healthy further with my yoga. I'm obviously studying for the spelling bee or something, the Scripps spelling bee with my reading of the dictionary. And then I'm off to a job I love. Throughout that whole description, you probably got enough content to interview me for the next 4 hours. So if I was an interviewer and you gave me that plus, I would be very happy, because it's a menu for a conversation for the next period of time. The trick to the plus, if you're getting to the more advanced levels, is obviously you're trying to convey your personality. So I just conveyed a little bit of a corny jokes, maybe a bit of a wise guy, but I also shared with you that part of my personality. I also share with you, I love pets and other things that kind of, again, would serve as good fodder for conversation down the road. So number 2 is answer plus. And again, I can expand on that, and I will probably as we dig in a little bit deeper. 3 would be, and a lot of times we're talking about teenagers here, young adults, but for everybody. 3 is when we have a conversation, when there's an answer or an answer plus or an engagement, there should be some level of expertise expressed. So you don't have to be a 14-year-old expert in mathematics or in history or in squash or in community service, whatever the topic is you're talking about. But I do expect you to have a little bit of expertise in that area. If you do, it makes my time with you more valuable. If we're at a birthday party or a social event, if you're in an interview for a school or a job, obviously they're looking for the expertise to share that. Far too many times, especially students, give generic terms. I had a call this morning with a new student I'm onboarding today, and she's lovely and she's going to be great. But right now she speaks in Genericsville, USA. I mean, you cannot get more generic than, how was your weekend? Interesting. Oh, what do you like about school? It's fun. No, thanks. Back of the line. When I talk about taking 1 or 2 kids out of 10, those are instant answers that tell me nothing about their expertise and give me no substance to go on. So, if I think of an example, offhand, well, there's so many planes on which this is applicable. One thing I do with all my students, obviously, is do a deep dive on character strengths. So once you determined what your character strengths are, this actually young woman this morning was actually fantastic off the cuff when I invited her to share what she thought were the 3 top characteristics a young person, her age, her generation, needs to possess to succeed in life. And believe it or not, she said critical thinking skills. I thought she was stealing that from a school catalog, but she really meant it, and it was true. The second one she shared was courage, and that's where she gave a nice answer. It was It was acceptable. It was an average plus answer. But, my homework I gave her was to go back and study courage. Look it up on ChatGPT and Gemini, and look at the history of the word. Look at famous people who had courage. What was their story? What did they do? So even if she did that for 5 minutes and came across material she likes that she could internalize and have be part of her vernacular, part of her story, and someone asks her about her interests, she can share that little bit of expertise. And that would, I don't want to overdo this, but that would probably put her at the front of the line. If I'm looking for 1 or 2 kids out of 10 at age 13, 14, 15, 18, 17, and someone's going to tell me about how courage is an important characteristic they have tried to develop or that they possess, and how that characteristic is important in life, who's possessed it, who's done things with it, I'd be pretty impressed with that answer. So 3 is expertise. And again, it's not being expert, but it's having some expertise, and of course, having the confidence to share that. Step 4 is sort of engage and educate. Far too many interviewees just answer questions. Question, answer, question, answer. Kind of boring. It would satisfy an acceptable interview if the interviewer asked questions, the person gave answers. But you want to engage the interviewer appropriately, but as much as you possibly can without sort of pushing it and going over the line. So what is an engagement? If someone said, "Oh, Mr. Diffley," if I'm being interviewed and they say, "Oh, Mr. Diffley, where are you from?" And I said, I'm from Boston or Arlington, Mass. Instead of just continuing on or answering the next question, I would say, "Are you familiar with Boston? Are you familiar with Arlington, Mass?" That's where I'm from. So I'm checking in. I also call this check-ins. So you're doing a check-in with the interviewer to see if they have familiarity. This is a great point of connection here, right? So if they say, "Oh, I've never been to Boston. I've always wanted to go." So if they've been to Boston, I know they haven't been to Arlington, that's for sure. And then in turn, I can show enthusiasm or depression, depending on how much I like my hometown where I grew up. But if I know they haven't seen it, I said, "Oh my gosh, you've got to get to Boston. It's amazing. You got to do this, that, and the other thing," etc. So that's an engagement on the simplest plane and the simplest terms. And once you engage the person, if they are familiar with Boston, they said, "Oh my gosh, I love Boston. I lived there for 2 years when I got out of college." Now we have a connection and we have something in common, and it's familiar. So again, if they don't know it, then you can go into education mode, say a few things about it, why they should do it or see it or experience it. That's very, very critical to this educate and engage stage. I should have said at the beginning of this podcast, one question I typically ask my students is, do you want to be excellent? Do you want to be a person of impact? Because if you don't, goodbye. And I don't mean to be smug about that. Living a wonderful, well-balanced, and there's a better word for this, but average life is a fantastic existence. And kudos to anybody who chooses that. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people to be at least in the above average space or the exceptional space. And so with that, in my perspective of 33 years, I can tell you where you are in your level of development and maturity relative to speaking, AQ, etc. And again, confidence to be able to engage someone is huge. That's why so many students just answer questions. Question, answer, 20, 30 minutes later, interview done. But once you start engaging someone and sharing information you have, looking for that sort of love connection or that connection, you separate yourself and you distinguish yourself. And you remembered, right? You remembered for that. So, this is, I could probably argue each one is equally important, but the engage, step 4, engaging for a young person is huge. Because right away, by having the confidence to ask a question, to do a check-in, and it's only polite to do a check-in, to be quite honest with you. The opening story in the book is about a colleague of mine named Mr. Bradley, who was a professional musician, toured the world with Prince and Jody Watley. I tell his story in the book. It's actually, the publishers loved this story and made it the opening story in the book. So quite often a student didn't have the skill of engagement. Well, Mr. Bradley was a musician. He ran the studio, the music production studio at Choate, where we both worked. And he would have, of course, a lot of musicians were funneled to Mr. Bradley for interviews because he had the expertise to understand whether they were good or not. And so many times he would invite the student to tell him about themselves, and they would go on and on about violin or viola or piano. And Mr. Bradley was a professional pianist or keyboardist in the music world, but played piano when he was younger. So they would go on and on, instead of at the beginning of the conversation where Mr. Bradley would say, tell me about your interests or your music abilities. They could say, well, I love to play the piano. Are you a piano player, Mr. Bradley? Or are you familiar with the piano? If they said that, he could say, well, look at my wall. There's where all my gold records are for my time as a professional musician. But so many students didn't do that. They just went on to tell their story for 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes. And when they were done, Mr. Bradley would politely confess, well, I'm actually, was a professional musician for, 25 or 30 years. And naturally, the student would be a little bit mortified, a little bit embarrassed, because they had just spoken to an expert about something they were trying to convey they had some expertise in. So smart to engage someone. It's like telling someone all about something and never knowing that person already experienced it. Can a 13-year-old really pull that off? My answer is absolutely 100% yes. And it loops back to number one, which is personalization. And personalization, when you walk into a room, you are like casually and subtly, you are like Hawkeye. You are looking for anything that you can relate. Now, remember, everything that's put out in a storefront, an admission office, is meant for the consumer, the visitor, to take in. Right? They didn't put stuff out there that's random. It's meant there to be there for a reason. So that person would simply walk into Mr. Bradley's office and should quickly spot 3 or 4 framed gold records on the wall. It would be the first thing they would say was, wow, are those your gold records? That's amazing. And what a great way to start a conversation, right? So not everyone's aware of those things. They're again, they could be nervous and perfectly normal. And again, this word is going to sound rude when I say it, but perfectly average. But we're not looking for average. We're looking for above average and exceptional. So, to miss that fact would just suggest that maybe the student's a little less mature, younger, or nervous. There may be other reasons that the school would admit that person. It's not the death of them, but it's a missed opportunity. Engaging, again, is a separator. It's one of the biggest separators out there. And it's the same at, if you finish a softball or baseball game and it's a team filled with 13 or 14-year-olds, it's the player that comes up to the parents after the game and engages other parents, says, thank you for coming and watching. We really appreciate your support. That was fantastic. That person's going to stand out because they have the courage and confidence and the thoughtfulness and the awareness to be an engaging person outside of their own bubble and circumstances, which is usually which is almost the price of entry for the top schools, is your ability to see outside your own bubble. It's why you're looking at in the case of students looking at boarding school, it's why you'd be looking there in the first place. You realize there's a bigger world out there. You're mature enough to see beyond your town, your local, scene of friends, etc. And because there's millions of smart kids, millions of smart kids who are smart in their room and don't engage. But it's the ones that see beyond that are really the difference makers and that are the most appealing, in my opinion, to schools. So that's 4. 5 is kind of, it's almost a little bit silly, goofy, funny, but it's key. And 5 is called landing the plane. And that is finishing the conversation and getting out of the airport with your luggage before the whole crowd comes. It's ending a conversation so you don't circle the airport looking for a place to land, run out of fuel, and talk yourself out of getting admitted or talk yourself out of a job. I don't know if I'd be rich if I had a nickel every time someone was killing the interview, doing great, and then they kept talking and talking, and they got lost. And they said, what was the question? I don't even know where I am. And they revealed something about themselves that was less impressive. Again, is it the end of the earth? No. But knowing when you've answered the question, wrap it up, land that sucker right on the tarmac, and get out of there ready for the next question. Now, when you land the plane, ideally you thank the captain. So, if you just talked about your ability in lacrosse, you would tell the story of your lacrosse ability and then connect it to the school you're applying to. So, and that's why I want to be part of the Taft School lacrosse program, because you guys are the best. And I've always wanted to be a part of it. That's landing the plane with a compliment. Now the interviewer has a choice. Move on to the next topic, dig in for a little bit more, but they know the conversation is over. One big thing, it's not a big thing, but it's awkward. And that is talking over each other. You're not quite sure when the person's done. They pause, you jump in, they jump in. All of a sudden, it's not going well. It's clunky. It's awkward. You try to smooth it over and fix it. But once again, not the end of the world, but it's not very smooth. So you want to make it clear when you're done answering the question and leave it up to the interviewer to dig deeper or to move on to the next one. That is landing the plane. And those are the 5 steps. There's some layers that I may get into in a future podcast, but those are the key 5. There's things like framing, which is a big thing in politics. Politicians frame answers to questions, but they never actually answer the question. You don't want to do that in an interview. You want to answer the question, but you want to start perhaps by doing a little bit of framing. And I'll give it just a minute here of airtime. Someone says, what's your favorite subject? That's the question. The answer would be mathematics or math. And then you'd start talking about math. But before you would start talking about math and your love for it, you would have an opening statement or a framing. And so if someone said, tell me about your favorite subject, or tell me about math, you're interested in math, I see it's on your application, you'd say something like, well, first of all, Mr. Diffley, I love math. There's nothing better, maybe a lobster roll on a July 4th, but nothing better than math. And here's why. So that's the simplest version of framing. It's just telling the person how passionate you are. It's giving your answer plus a little bit off the line. So they know, wow, this person's enthusiastic. Now they're going to make the case of why math is the best subject ever invented. That's framing. I can dig into that a little bit later as well. But usually in my lessons with students, I go through these 5 things. I record it just like I did right now on this podcast and share and put it out there. But really it's funny. I almost did a post on this today, but there's a little humor in here. Everything's available on the internet. Now, hopefully I have some unique content. That's why I wrote a book. That's why it's a bestseller. I'm still giving it away. I'm doing it right now. Because the key to me, obviously, is teaching, training, mentoring, coaching. So to have someone grasp these concepts, it takes, hours to practice them. It takes weeks, months to implement them. I always talk about being, the next version of yourself. So God knows what version I am of me. But if I was 1.0, I want to be Ray 2.0, Mr. Diffley 2.0. And to get there, it's, you're going to have to not fake it till you make it. I appreciate that term. I'm happy to use it, but you have to be the next version of yourself before you become the next version of yourself. You have to practice, experiment with it. And this is part of what I was getting to in the humor pieces. It's style. Now, I would be the first to tell you that my style is not an A+, at least in fashion, but communication style, speaking style, having a personality, persona, I'm a big fan of that. And I can promise you that when I was 14 or 15 or 16 or 12 or 18, no one took me by the hand or took me in a Zoom, there was no Zoom then, and said, let's help you develop your style. It was not a conscious decision. It was just how it went. Now, some people have great style, they have charisma, they have character without much effort. But even for those people, I would say you really want to have an intentional plan and have a style. So this is one of the joyous things I do in my work is, again, I've used these terminology. I've used the terminology before. Well, I use the terminology. Self-awareness is the new GPA. I did a fun post on that. But you have to invest the time in yourself to become the best version of yourself. Plain and simple. There are no shortcuts to that piece of the puzzle. And some people spend their whole lives trying to figure out who they are and develop themselves. And it's hard if you don't have a guide. And this is one of the things, again, did I have a guide? No. I had wonderful parents. I had a wonderful family. I went to great schools, but there was no one doing this work for me and with me. Sometimes you get lucky. I'd call myself a late bloomer. No problem confessing to that. I would have loved to have this work done when I was younger. Would my outcome be significantly different? I don't know. But life is about odds. And I would love to stack the odds for the young people I work with. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast. I could be doing other things, but I just want to spread the word, get Speak Up, the book out there, get AQ out there, and help as many people as I possibly can. Some people will listen to this and they will implement it overnight. And it may take them a while to develop their style, but they'll get it. Other people will continue to say, they won't engage. They just don't have the confidence. They're not mature enough yet. That's fine. Hopefully they'll come around. They'll come to it. But you got to have a roadmap to know where to go. And this is, in my view, the best roadmap I can provide based on my 33 years of experience and 50,000 students engaged with. And here I am. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ray Diffley. This is AQ. Spread the word. I'll do a little promo for a retreat I'm having August 3rd and 4th this summer at the Saybrook Point Inn and Marina. Not a tough place to be for 2 days, but I will do an intensive AQ training, intensive Speak Up training, and so much more that will prepare kids for applications and interviews, and just to be a great conversationalist in life and to use their strengths to make the world a better place. So thanks for listening. See you next time.